This episode is sponsored by StationWise, the first staffing software to be truly firefighter-proof. Now, you may be wondering why I have software as a sponsor when I focus usually on physical and mental health of the first responders, and I will tell you exactly why. For the first time, this is a staffing platform that also is able to integrate wellness information through call load tracking, exposures, and wearables integration. Now, of course, StationWise focuses on staffing and allows you to manage staffing, choose vacation picks, put in rules for leave and trades, and even deploying strike teams. But through the latest programming and AI automation, they have streamlined this process to free up battalion chiefs so they can focus on what they're supposed to be doing on the operational side and the fireground. Now, StationWise is also able to monitor not only how many calls we've responded to in a shift, but the duration of the call, therefore the rest and recovery in between, thus monitoring the sleep deprivation that degrades our health and performance. It's accessible not only through the computer, but also on Apple and Android devices, meaning that you can access it not only within the station itself, but outside as well. Now, one of the most powerful features of StationWise, in my opinion, is the ability to run reports. Therefore, for example, be able to see just how much money is being used on overtime that could actually be front-loaded for proactive staffing, as well as setting alarms knowing when you are hitting overtime parameters. And another important feature is the integration of other programs and software for payroll, training, reports, etc. Now, StationWise is trusted by numerous agencies in California, Texas, and Idaho. And if you want to hear the full story from the founder, who he himself is a son of a firefighter, listen to episode 1163 with Marcus Edwards. And if you want to book a demo or learn more, go to stationwise.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show French Foreign Legion veteran and aviator Ty Miller. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from Ty's original journey into the American military, how his color vision made him ineligible, his journey into the French Foreign Legion, their history, his deployments to Chad and Bosnia, his transition out, his journey into aviation, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of almost 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Ty Miller. Enjoy. Well, Ty, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to our mutual friend, Dave Prashera-Best, for making this introduction. And secondly, I want to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Well, thank you very much, James. I appreciate being on.
Now, is Ty short for anything, or is it just Ty?
A good question. Ty is a part of my middle name. So my full name is Walter Tyrone Miller. And Tyrone, usually people hear the word Tyrone and they're thinking someone's a little bit bigger and maybe a different color than me.
Yes.
But so the short story behind that is, so my father is a cowboy and he had a favorite horse when I was born, and his horse's name was Ty. So I was named after my father's horse, and my mother said, well, it can't be just Ty, it has to be a little bit longer. So she added the roan, which is also a color of horse. So, but my sister and I both go by our middle names. So that's where Ty comes from.
I'm so glad I asked that. The reason I did, my son is Thai, Tai, and rather than
Oh,
make it
right.
short for something, because I had a a co-counselor when I was a counselor on summer camps, and his name was Ty, and it was short for Tyrone. But he was an African American gentleman from Atlanta that
Yeah,
dressed in all hip hop stuff and had dreads, and we were just this
nice.
great kind of like good cop bad cop combo for these wealthy children that we got to take care of for a few months. But
All right.
yeah, that was the inspiration of my son's name. But it was the reverse because I didn't want it to be, shortened of something. I just made it Thai, Tai. So there we go. Interesting
I
stories
like it.
about names.
Yeah.
All right. Well, very first question: where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
I am in Vancouver, Canada, right downtown. My wife and I live in a very nice apartment on English Bay, and it's as typical for Vancouver in any month that is not kind of May through August. It's a little chilly and wet and rainy here, but sometimes we often like it that way because it keeps the city from getting too busy.
Sadly, when I think of Vancouver, I think of, if I've got the right city, I think of Gabon Mate and the opioid crisis and the homelessness. Is that's a shame that that's the first thing that comes into my mind. Is that an issue still? Are you seeing that a lot in your city? Have you seen kind of an evolution of that problem?
Boy, whether I've seen an evolution or not, I'm not sure. But when I first, growing up as an American, Canada is this kind of nebulous place to the north, and people don't really pay much attention to it because nothing happens in Canada, quote unquote. Americans are more familiar with pretty much every other part of the world than their next door neighbor. So when I first came to Canada during my graduate school studies, because I had a case competition, an MBA case competition in Montreal. And so Eastern Canada, I knew a little bit about. I didn't know anything about Western Canada, even though I grew up in Arizona and Colorado. But so when I started working for the software company, Crystal Decisions, is the first time I came to Vancouver. And I thought, wow, this is a pretty neat place. But the thing that struck me equally as much about Vancouver, in addition to its beauty, was how much homelessness there is here. When I first came to Vancouver and I was kind of walking downtown and I saw homelessness everywhere, and it really took me by surprise. I was almost shocked by it. And a lot of that homelessness is because people are born into challenged families. They have gotten into drugs, but some way or another. There wasn't, I don't think, an opioid crisis at the time that I first came here in the 2000s, but that may be just because I wasn't as familiar with opioids in general. But there were a lot of challenges, and so whether that has changed or progressed since then to now, I really don't know. I'm not that attuned to it. My wife is much more involved with people that are in challenged situations, and she's volunteered for organizations to help families and young mothers with things like that. But again, I'm just not as familiar with it. I see it, but I've almost become numb to it at this point.
Yeah, no, that's a shame. It just seems to be on the radar a lot when we talk about homelessness and addiction in Canada specifically. Actually, hopefully, I've got Gabor Mate coming on early next year now, so
Oh, wow.
that'd be amazing. So we'll get to find out, how they're actually doing.
Yeah.
All right, well then, let's start at the very beginning of your timeline. Then you mentioned obviously the States. Tell me where you were born, and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic. What your parents did, how many siblings.
Okay. So I was born in Montana. My father my father grew up in Iowa. I was on a farm. And when he was like 16 or 17 years old, he basically ran away from home. He always wanted to be a cowboy. And he liked the farm, but he liked it when his family were farming with traditional like livestock, like pulling the plow with oxen type of thing. But then his father moved into the mechanized environment, and my dad really lost interest. If he had interest in farming, he really wanted to be a cowboy. So he basically ran away. And he was a hunting guide and a guide for pack trips in Montana at the time that my mother came out. She grew up in the East Coast in New Jersey, and a fairly well-to-do, I'd say upper middle-class family. My grandfather was an industrialist, but he really liked the outdoors. And so they would go to Montana on these pack trips in the summer. And that's where my mother met my dad. And so it ultimately became kind of the quintessential cowboy school teacher pair. So they were married. They're 8 years difference in age. So my dad's 8 years older. And they had me first, again, born in Montana. And about 2 weeks later, they moved me against my will to Arizona. And that's where they tried to start a life leading pack trips themselves, based on a mining claim in the middle of the Tonto National Forest, mining claim from the 1800s, basically on the side of a mountain. And that's where they set up camp. So no electricity, no running water. My mother then had a second, a daughter, my sister Sloan, and that's where she raised us for 8 years. But after those 8 years, she was kind of ready to get back to civilization. I imagine it would have been pretty tough as a mother raising your kids in that type of an environment. So after 8 years, they separated. She moved into the nearest town, which is about 45 minutes away, most of it by four-wheel drive, or I'd say half of it by four-wheel drive to get out of where we were living. And then a year or so after that, they actually divorced. Interesting story, they both remarried. My mother remarried and she moved with the kids and my stepfather then up to Colorado, which is where I spent the rest of my childhood through high school. My dad also remarried like years later that marriage lasted for like a year or two, and it was kind of a disaster. He can be challenged to live with because of his lifestyle. He's, again, very off the grid, very rustic. He's still a cowboy. He'll never not be a cowboy. But then after 23 years of having been divorced from each other and remarried to other people and then divorced again, my parents remarried each other.
Wow.
And they've been married now for, I don't know, close to 20 years maybe. But it works because they live in separate states. So my
secret to a happy marriage is
yeah, that's right. So my mom still lives in Fort Collins, Colorado, and my dad lives between the towns of Bisbee and Tombstone, Arizona. Tombstone being the famed gunfight at the OK Corral place, but he still lives off the grid. And they see each other once or twice a year. Usually the whole family descends upon my father in Arizona just after Christmas, and he puts us all to work fixing fence, moving rocks, digging holes, whatever, doing manual labor. So they have a good relationship, and but it's a totally different relationship. They're different people than what they were. My sister always wanted to be a doctor. So she became a radiologist, and she just retired, I guess, technically this year. And she lives in Washington State. So all of my family are American. They live in the U.S. I actually renounced my U.S. citizenship 2 years ago after having lived in Canada now since 2000 or 2001. For multiple reasons. One, just I wanted to simplify my life, and two, I was getting tired of being taxed more than my fair share by the U.S. and Canadian government. So there is an income tax treaty between the U.S. and Canada, but there are all these other taxes that people don't talk about. Things like we have a tax-free savings account here. There are excise taxes, small business taxes, lots of different taxes that aren't included in that treaty. So I decided, okay, I'm just going to simplify everything, and I kind of identified now more as a Canadian than as an American. There's been lots of changes in the U.S. over the past couple of decades. So that's where I am now.
Amazing. Yeah, I have dual citizenship, but there's no issue as far as incomes or anything because I've been out here now for 23 years. Wow. So my whole income and career has been in America, so I'm able to keep that. But what's interesting is the British recognize my dual citizenship, but the Americans don't. So I'm in America, I'm just an American, supposedly. I mean, I've got two passports, so they're obviously just ignoring what is actually a fact. But it's bizarre that it would be one way, by the British and a different way by the Americans.
Yeah, well, in a way, the U.S. can still kind of get away with that because it's kind of the Pax Americana when you are still the world superpower, economically, militarily, et cetera. They're able to kind of set, in some ways, their own rules. The U.S., from the tax perspective, the U.S. is one of only two countries that taxes their citizens, regardless of whether that person have even ever set foot in the U.S. Like, there are many people that have been born American simply because their parents are American, but they've never actually been to the U.S. But they are still liable for taxes. The only other country that does that is apparently Eritrea in Eastern Africa. So,
are you talking about taxation without representation?
That is, yeah, I think there is some of that in there.
How ironic, as Alanis Morissette would say.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
All right. Well, when you were in the school age, and obviously your childhood spanned several different states by this point. What were you playing and doing as far as exercise and sports?
So I played lots of soccer, or football. I refer to it as football now, but so lots of soccer. It's called. That's what it's called. It's football. It's you use your foot and it is a ball, unlike North American football.
The egg throwing contest, I call it.
Yeah, exactly. I was always involved. I love playing pretty much all sports. I would say I'm an average to above average participant in most sports. I played a little basketball, but I have white man's disease. I can't jump. I played a little contact North American football, but I didn't really get big enough by the time high school came around to continue with that. Growing up in Colorado, it's one of the kind of the ski capital of the U.S., but with my mom being a school teacher and my stepfather, he was a bartender, didn't really have that much money, so I never got really good at skiing, so I didn't get to go that often. When I did go, it was usually because I would go with some of my friends and we would do what's called snowpacking, where for half the day the ski resort would have us hike up the sides of the runs, usually on the steeper runs and the black diamond runs, so to prevent avalanches, and then we would get to ski for free the second half of the day and the day following. That was really good exercise, I'll tell you. But that's how I got some of my skiing in, but was not great at it. I did as well cross country, so I'm pretty good at long distance running, and so yeah. But again, if there was something that got me active and outside, I was usually playing it. I never played baseball because I was never home during the summers. I was usually going to spend time with my dad in Arizona, so never did that. Was involved in some horsemanship activities when I was with my dad, doing like roping, but just for practice and stuff like that. So yeah, pretty active as a kid. Always riding a bike, dirt bikes.
What about career aspirations? When you were in the high school age, what were you dreaming of becoming?
When I was high school, I was always reading business magazines. So I was reading Business Week and Fortune, and for some reason, I just had an interest in an inclination towards business. I didn't know it, very generically speaking, but I was the only kid that always had a Business Week magazine that I was reading. And I thought that I wanted to be in finance. I was never really great at math. I love the idea of math and statistics and financial algorithms, et cetera, but I was never really good at it. So why I thought I would be good at and wanted to be in finance, I'm not sure. But that's what I thought. I wanted to be like a stockbroker or an analyst or something when I was in high school. And I was an okay student. I was never a straight A student, but I got decent grades, like A's and B's. I was always jealous of my sister because she was a straight A student. And in our family, whenever we got a report card, if we got straight A's, then my parents would take us out to dinner. So my sister got to go to whatever restaurant she wanted every quarter, and I didn't. I did once, but so I was never a fantastic student, but I was decent. So finished high school, and I knew I knew I had to go to university because that was the expectation that my mother in particular had. So she was as much involved in filling out the applications to apply for schools as I was. And we actually visited a number of schools around the US that were potential candidates for me to go to. And I finally chose Bentley University, which is a private school outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And so while my mother and her salary and my stepfather and his salary were not significant, I was lucky in that my grandfather had his own business, did very well, and my mother was good at creating trust funds for my sister and I. So I got to attend a really good but expensive private university back east, and that was Bentley University that I went to.
So walk me through then the first occupation you found yourself in.
Well, so would that include like summer jobs in high school, or
just whatever career you initially found yourself?
My first career would have been the French Foreign Legion. Yeah, military career.
So let's fill the gap then. How did you go from wanting to be in finance to standing outside a French gate?
Yeah, exactly. So, well, where would that begin? So I got my undergraduate degree in economics. And I got that degree in economics because by that time I felt that economics was a broad enough discipline where it wouldn't limit me to a career. I'll call it a traditional career in a white collar industry, whether that was finance or software or operations management, you name it. But I realized about halfway through university that when I graduated university, I didn't actually want to be stuck behind a desk in an office doing whatever. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew it had to be something that had some adventure, had some risk. I didn't know pretty much anything about the military because I don't come from a military background. My family history is not in the military. No one in my family has been in the military, other than apparently on my mother's side, I had an ancestor that was in the Spanish-American War that was a mail carrier. So that was the extent of my understanding of military. But as a kid, I was always fascinated with military hardware. I was always drawing ships and tanks and planes, but the idea of being a soldier never really occurred to me. It never entered my mind. But again, halfway through university, I decided, you know what, I think I want to do this. I want to go do something. I want to serve. It was both for the adventure, and I also wanted to serve my country. I wanted to serve the U.S. And so, being halfway through university, I knew that I had an opportunity to attend one of the military academies, whether that was the U.S. Army Academy at West Point, or the Naval Academy, or the Air Force Academy. And so I was starting to look into the Naval Academy, and I liked the idea of becoming a pilot, but I learned pretty quickly that because I was colorblind, that was not an option. And I knew I was colorblind. I didn't know that would be a limiting kind of theme, I guess, in my life, actually. And it turned out that not only could I not join the Naval Academy, I couldn't join the Army, Navy, or Air Force being colorblind at the time. And I thought, wow, this sucks. I was like, what am I going to do now? And so the Marine Corps, they did accept people that were colorblind. And that was actually fine for me because the Marine Corps had the kind of atmosphere of a tough outfit. And that's what I was looking for. I wanted something to test myself physically, mentally. And the Marine Corps was like, okay, great, I'll do the Marine Corps. So I applied for the officer candidate school while I was in my third year of university. and I did great on all the tests. I got 99% on the physical fitness test with like a 3 mile run, pull ups, sit ups, etc. The the medical test is what got me. And it wasn't because I was colorblind, but I played soccer for football for my university, did an NCAA Division II school, and in one game in my third year season, I was in a one-on-one. I was a goalkeeper, and basically the guy that I had the one-on-one with, he came in cleat first and severed my posterior cruciate ligament, and so I was out for the rest of the season. I had my knee was scoped, but they decided not to repair it. They just cleaned it up, and they felt that the muscles around that would compensate, and for the most part, it did. But when I went to the Marine Corps medical exam, there were these signs that said, if you don't tell us everything, then you could risk being in jail for 5 years and pay a $10,000 fine. And again, because I didn't have any history of military service in my family, I didn't have anyone to tell me what really you had to say and what you kind of could keep to the side. So I told them. And so they laser focused on that, my knee, and they were testing my knee. And they said, you know what, we can't take you because of your knee. For insurance reasons, we can't accept you. And I was like, oh man, so there's no one else in the U.S., no other branch of the U.S. military that I could try. And so I had the attending surgeon that did the surgery. I had the physical therapists that I went to afterward to rehabilitate myself. And I played soccer again my senior year for university, so it was fine for that. I had my senator of my state of Colorado write a letter on my behalf requesting a waiver for me. And this is just to enlist at this point in the Marine Corps. I wrote a letter to the chief surgeon of the Navy asking for a waiver. I tried to enlist through 3 different states, Massachusetts, Colorado, and Nebraska. And it was a major in Colorado that was trying to figure out how to enable me to enlist through this 3rd state, because he couldn't believe that the government wasn't letting me join just for my knee. But ultimately, my last step would have been to write to the President of the United States asking for a waiver. And that was President Clinton at the time. But by that time, I was like, you know what? If you guys don't want me that badly, I'll figure out something else. So at the time, the internet wasn't really a thing yet. This is 1992. I went to the library and just started researching what kind of interesting careers and adventurous things you could do as a 23-year-old actually. And that's when I stumbled upon the French Foreign Legion, just the idea of the French Foreign Legion. I thought, oh, interesting. This looks kind of cool. So I read a few books by some people that had been in the Legion, including Simon Murray, who was a famous Brit that had served in the Legion and to become a very successful businessman, I think, in Hong Kong after a while. And then I also read a book by an author by the name of Douglas Porch, who was a professor at the Naval War College and at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. He was a professor at the Citadel. So we had a correspondence, and I read his book, and we had a correspondence, and I asked him about the Legion, and he actually tried to persuade me not to join the French Foreign Legion. He basically said that as having finished university, my peers, I would kind of fall behind my peers. They would have gotten careers, and they would have families, and they would have houses, and that when I went to the Legion, if I didn't make a lifetime career out of it, when I came back, all of my peers would be kind of off, had done their thing. And I was like, well, that's exactly what I don't want to do. I want to do something different and challenge myself in different ways. I also contacted the FBI, because the other thing that I learned was that as an American, if you serve in a foreign military, you risk losing your U.S. citizenship, except for the Israeli military. As an American citizen, you can serve in the Israeli military, and there's some type of deal between Israel and the U.S. where that's fine.
It's pretty apparent these days.
Yes, exactly. So I contacted the FBI, and they said, you know what, if you don't tell us, we don't really care. So I was like, okay, that's it. That's all I need to know. So it was a month or two later. It was April of 93 by this time. And I still remember the day so my mother and my father knew at this point that I was going to go off and do this Legion thing. I don't know if they really believed it or not. I remember my mother taking me to the airport shuttle in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I remember saying goodbye and taking the shuttle then to the airport in Denver to fly to Paris. And I didn't realize until months after that day was April Fool's Day. And so I still wonder to this day if my mother realized that as well and thought it was some type of cruel joke that I was playing on her. But I arrived in Paris, took a train from Paris to Marseille, and then from Marseille took a commuter train to the town or the suburb of Marseille called Aubagne, which is the headquarters of the French Foreign Legion. And by the time I got to the front gate, it was late night, early morning. It was like, I don't know, 2 or 3 in the morning. And it was dark. It was chilly. It was rainy. And I got to the front gate, and so everyone in the Legion does guard duty. And so the guard at the front gate was there, and I said I'd like to join the French Foreign Legion. And I said it in my broken French. I had learned, like many Americans that learn quote unquote a foreign language I spoke it very brokenly a little bit. I knew some phrases, and so I was able to get enough out just for him to understand that I wanted to join the French Foreign Legion. So he basically said, okay, just a minute. And he went back and got his sergeant on duty at the time. And he came out and asked me a few questions. I can't remember if we were speaking in French or some type of English or what. And I can't remember what the questions were, but ultimately they understood that I was wanting to join. So they brought me in, and the sergeant got then another, I think he was a corporal or premier first class, who was a Brit. And to walk me to then the barracks where they held guys that were volunteering. And as we were walking to the barracks, I learned that he was there at that regiment, convalescing from having broken both ankles, jumping out of an airplane for a parachute jump. And I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to go to that was the 2nd Foreign Parachute Regiment. So I was like, that's exactly what I want to do. That's where I want to go. So I was in Aubagne for about 2 weeks. That's where all the initial volunteers go, and that's where the French military and government does their background tests. You do physical fitness tests, you do medical tests, psychological tests, intelligence tests. They do background checks. It's a combination of Interpol and the French Foreign Service and military intelligence, just to make sure that. So it used to be in the Legion you could join with regardless of what you did in your past, and so a number of people at different points in time join the Legion to escape something. And in the past, those somethings could be even, I guess, potentially murder and rape and stuff like that. The Legion at the time that I joined and now, they do still take in people that are escaping some type of a crime or escaping some type of past that they want to get away from, but not if it's a blood crime. And it actually turned out that because I didn't have anything that I was running from to join the Legion, I couldn't even change my name. So I was looking forward to getting a nom de guerre. And I had actually researched names that I thought would be cool to have, like Skylax, who was a Greek adventurer, or Scipio or something like that. But no, I didn't even get to change my name. I had to keep my name. So after those 2 weeks, they considered me apt to then go to the initial training, which was 4 months in another regiment, the 4th Regiment in Castelnaudary, which is near Toulouse. And so I was there for 4 months. A month of that training is done in these remote farms near the Pyrenees. And so that's where we do more like basic training, hand-to-hand combat, weapons training, some limited survival training. And actually, I actually got to march or parade in the 14 Juillet, or 14th of July Bastille parade in Paris during those 4 months, which was really unusual because we were just a training regiment. That was quite, I mean, when I was there, I was like, wow, just 5 months earlier, I was just home in Fort Collins, Colorado, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And now here I am marching down the middle of the Champs-Élysées in Paris. I loved what I was doing. I loved the unknown, not knowing what was coming next. I liked the idea that I was away from everyone else and what a quote unquote normal life was. I didn't have homesickness. I didn't really miss, even though I have been and still am close to my family, my sister, my parents. I wasn't missing them. I felt kind of badly for my mother still because I knew she was worried. But I didn't have contact with them for almost a year because the Legion doesn't let you have contact with the outside world basically for that first year. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I mean, humans have a challenge of remembering some of the bad things in the past. And so I know that's some of what I have with the Legion. I remember all the great things that I experienced and did during the Legion. There were some times that were not so fun as well. But I wouldn't pass up those 5 years that I spent in the Legion for anything. It was some of the best 5 years of my life.
What is the history of the Legion? Is it pre-World War II?
It is, yeah. So the Legion started in the 1830s by King Louis Philippe. And it was, I think it was in Mexico, actually. So France had a colonial presence in Mexico. And it was in 1863, actually. I think it was 1863 that there's kind of the most famous battle and what is now celebrated day in the French Foreign Legion, which is the Battle of Cameroon. And this is where it was something like 40 or 50 legionnaires were held up against an army of hundreds or thousands of Mexicans, and they fought to the last man, and they all died. And the Capitaine d'Anjou, like before ultimately being killed, he had lost an arm, and so he's fighting with one arm, and so it was essentially, as with many, if not most, European militaries of the time, a mercenary force. Most, as my understanding of military history in Europe anyway, most militaries were hired by the aristocracy or the nobility at the time to fight the wars that were being fought in Europe. So that was no different with the French Foreign Legion. But it's the only force that has remained as a hired military to this day that is still a part of a government organization. And so it has had many chapters in its history. You mentioned World War II. So there were lots of Germans that joined the French Foreign Legion after the end of World War II. And it's a lot of those guys that would have fought then in Indochina when France was still in Vietnam, and they were therefore Dien Bien Phu. They were often in North Africa, in Morocco and Algeria. And so the Legion is still there today. It's still made up of people from around the world that want to be in an elite force, but for whatever, and want some of the, I guess, adventure that they feel that they may not be able to get in their own country, or they just want to try something different. When I joined the Legion, and it was a lot of upheaval in Central and Eastern Europe. So politically, economically, in the early 90s and mid 90s, it was when the Berlin Wall had fallen. The US or the USSR had kind of broken apart, become the 15 different republics. And it was a challenge, as I understood it, living in those areas in that time. So there were lots of Russians, Ukrainians, Poles, Czechs, Hungarians in the Legion that were trying to join Legion. They were looking for a better life, really. And almost all of them had previous military experience already with their countries. In my training platoon, there was a Russian submarine captain. There was a mathematician from Mexico. There was a bricklayer from Italy, like all walks of life. People often talk about the U.S. being a melting pot of ethnicities and backgrounds, and so I referred to the French Foreign Legion as a tossed salad. It was really just a mix of everyone that you could think of, and from all over the world. There was someone from Japan in my training platoon. There were a number of Brits, Irish, Welsh, Scottish, English, and there were cliques in the Legion. There were the Anglophones, so people that had English as a native language, whether they were from Australia or New Zealand, US, and Canada. There were very, very few people from the US and Canada. I was the only North American in my training platoon. There was, when I got to the 2nd Foreign Parachute Regiment, there were, I think, 3 other Americans. There was 1 Canadian. There were quite a few Brits. There were quite a few English and Scot and Welsh and Irish guys. And there were a number of New Zealanders, Kiwis, and Australians as well. And so you had cliques of Anglophones. You had cliques of Eastern Europeans, and the Poles and the Russians and the Ukrainians. They all seemed to be able to speak enough of the same language to be able to get along. But those were kind of the 2 big, sometimes we referred to them as mafias in the Legion, is those cliques. So yeah, 4 months in the training regiment. When one of the first things that they told us in the training regiment was that if you finished first, you would get your pick of regiment that you wanted to go to. And there were and are still 10 regiments basically that make up the French Foreign Legion, and they're installed mostly in southern France. The Parachute Regiment is in Corsica. There's one in South America. There's one in Djibouti in Eastern Africa. There's one in Mayotte, which is an island in the South Pacific. But the second Parachute Regiment, like, it was the best. It was the best of the best, and that I knew that that's where I wanted to go. And so I worked hard and in that training for the 4 years, and I finished first. And so I was like, awesome, I'm going to the Parachute Regiment, and that's where things are really going to happen. I remember the day when we finished the training, we would go and present ourselves to the captain of the training company, and the captain would tell you where you're going. But I thought, I'm finishing first. I'm going to be able to let him know where I want to go. So I said, okay, I want to go to the Parachute Regiment. And he said, I'm sorry, you can't go to the Parachute Regiment because you're colorblind. And I just, like, this wave of, like, holy crap. My colorblindness again is getting the best of me. And I couldn't believe what was happening. And I was like, man, when I left the building, I was actually crying because I was so upset. I couldn't believe this was happening. And I told them, I was like, if I can't go to the Parachute Regiment, I'm leaving. I'm deserting. And I'm not a quitter. Like, I will keep knocking on that wall for as long as it takes. But that was tough. The next day or 2 days after, I can't remember what it was, they said, okay, we're going to send you to the military hospital, and you're going to get another checkup. And they sent me with an envelope in my hand that I was to present at the military hospital in La Varenne, which is just out in Albania, outside of the headquarters regiment. And I don't know to this day what was in that envelope, but I left the hospital eligible to go to the parachute regiment. So I was a happy camper. That's right. Yeah.
Well, it's so crazy. We talked obviously a few weeks ago about this, but that was the origin story of why I'm not a British firefighter. When I was in school, we did the annual, medicals, and
Yeah.
they told me with the little book, oh, you can't see colors, you're colorblind. They literally said you can't be a pilot, you can't be a firefighter, and everything
Yeah.
that I wanted to be, almost everything, was literally taken off the table. And
Yeah.
years and years and years and years later, shortening the story incredibly, I find myself wanting to be a firefighter in America and saying, there's no way I can see colors. What are they talking about? And so ended up challenging the test and told them, oh, tell me anything in this room, I'll tell you what color it is. And lo and behold, I passed. And what it was is that, and my wife's an optometrist now, so she's in that world. And she said, yeah, that just gives you an indication that there's a deficiency. And then you do deeper tests to see like what level it is. And I just have a red-green deficiency. I'm not colorblind. It's like not being 20/20, being 20/40, and them telling you, yeah, you're blind. No, you're not blind. Yeah. You're just not, you can't see as well. So what level did you end up discovering your kind of color deficiency was?
I'm not sure what level it is. I know that the tests, so in French, what they say I have is a Daltonian deficiency. I probably should research what that actually means, but it is a red-green colorblind deficiency. So whether it's technically color blindness or not, I don't know. Clearly, I know now it is not color blindness to a degree that doesn't let me fly, because that will be another story that I'll mention in a bit here. What I do know is that I confused shades of colors. So I confuse blues and purples, greens and browns, greens and reds. And like my first year of university, my mother got me this great backpack. My mother's colorblind as well, by the way. And apparently like it's only 1% of the colorblind population is female. But
they're carriers, though, aren't they?
They are the carriers. So I can't be too upset with my mother because she's colorblind herself, and she's really colorblind. Like she can see colors, but they're really messed up. So she's much more colorblind than I am. But she had gotten me a backpack for my first year of university. I thought, oh, awesome. This is a really nice blue backpack. And my friends were all kind of looking at me like, that's like brilliant purple, right? And I was like, oh, no, but oh well, it's good enough for me. What I learned is that I can read like the first couple pages in those books that have the dots and the numbers that are in those dots. But after the first couple pages, I can't see any of the numbers. When I was in the Legion, I memorized most of the pages of that book in order to participate in some of the training that I wanted to do. But I've forgotten what those pages are now, what the numbers are in those pages. And now for flying as a helicopter pilot, I've learned that there's a test called the Farnsworth test that I can take. And basically you're lining up these chips in order based upon their shades from purple to green to blue. And I'm able to pass that. I'm able to pass that pretty well, actually. That didn't prevent me the first time from cheating on that test either. Because the first time I took that test, it was when I was starting my helicopter flight training. And I hadn't been approved by Transport Canada yet to get like the highest medical certificate you need to actually then become a commercial helicopter pilot. And I was really nervous that I wouldn't be able to pass this test, even though I had tried it online, and I was doing fine. But this was during COVID when you had to wear a mask, and I wear glasses now for reading. So when you wear a mask, the lenses get fogged up, and the assistant to the optometrist was telling me I had to do this test one eye at a time, and I knew that wasn't the case. And I actually had them call Transport Canada and had them talk to each other so they could realize they didn't have to do that. And they also wouldn't let me initially they wouldn't let me take off my mask so I wouldn't fog up my glasses, but I got them to be okay with that. And I was so kind of worked up by that point. I was like, man, if I fail this test, it's like the end of the beginning of my helicopter pilot attempt at a career. But the nurse had left the room during the time that I was doing this test. And so I surreptitiously did flip a couple of the chips, and they were like numbered or something. I can't remember. And I only had to swap like 2 of them to make sure I can't remember if I got a perfect score or not, but I passed it with flying colors, no pun intended. And I take the test each 6 months now that I get renewed for my medical, and I'm able to do it now. I can put them in the order that are needed. But that first time that I took that Farnsworth test, there were just so many things that were coming up that were being blockers for whatever reason. But when I passed that test, I was like, oh God, like beads of sweat, wipe them off. And then it wasn't until like 4 months later that the Transport Canada, which is kind of like the equivalent of the FAA in the US, sent me my medical certificate showing that I had passed all of the medical requirements to become a helicopter pilot. That piece of paper, the wave of joy that was passing through me when I realized that I had passed the medical, especially the color test and the color blindness that had held me back from so many different things. I was on cloud 9, and it was just an amazing feeling. And it was just this simple piece of paper saying, yeah, you've got your category 1 medical. It was just an amazing feeling.
It's such an important conversation, though, because, when you were trying to get into the military, it was a hard no. And I'm the same with you with the books. The first few pages, yes. And then after that, nothing. It's just a bunch of dots. Yeah. You can see there's kind of a part of a number there, but you can't see the whole thing.
Yeah.
But then you get into the profession you're trying to get into, and no one says, oh, if there's a fire, then you'll see an aquamarine light. No, you see a red, yellow, or green. Yeah. It's pretty damn obvious, what do you need to see? Yeah. And you can see them. So unless it's like a bizarre shade of car that you're trying to find in some, then maybe that's a little bit more challenging. But, usually the one with the dead person hanging out is the one that you're trying to go to. So,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, and I've learned and 2 other things have happened since then related to the color blindness. One, I learned that my instructor during my initial flight training to get my commercial helicopter pilot license, he is colorblind, color deficient, whichever word we want to use, and Dave Prashera Best is colorblind. And he went through some similar challenges, both for flying helicopters in the British military, but also, and I think even more so, flying in the Canadian military. And it was him being persistent and saying, look, I need to take the Farnsworth test because I can pass that, and then I can fly in Canada. So it was kind of welcome news to see these other pilots that were also color deficient and doing just fine.
So for people listening, when these hurdles are being put up, even I'm gonna tell you that the psych test, another one, the MMPI we have here, which is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Interview. When I started this podcast and started getting all these people on from psychology, psychiatry, they told me that was never meant to be used as a standalone test. It's part of forensic psychology, where you do a gamut of tests and it gives you an overall view of this person. So we've taken this test and said, oh, this is what you got to pass. The polygraph, I mean, complete smoke and mirrors. I mean, it really is. Yeah. I've got someone coming on from the, what is he in? The FBI or Secret Service? I think it's Secret Service. And that was his world. And even then, at that much higher level, there's still an element of, really, you're just trying to get someone to confess to something.
Right.
So you look at these barriers, these hurdles that are put in front of first responders and military, and it can be, decimating. They've wanted to be this thing for the whole life. They've trained, they've studied, they've kept their grades up, they've kept their fitness up. And then, boom, you hit it because of this test that really doesn't even have any foundation in truly dictating whether you are the right kind of candidate or not. So I think these stories are important to just always question. And if something is stopping you, find someone who got around it, find someone who navigated that, and then go, either just learn from them and do the thing, or even reach out to them. Because I was obviously not destined to be a firefighter in the UK. I had this bizarre journey that took me to the States and then out the fire service. But, if that's stopping someone from doing what they've always wanted to do, whatever profession you're in, question it first. There might be a point where, you can't physically or mentally do that particular thing. I would not be a high-level mathematician. I can tell you that right now. But, but if it's just, some of these blocks that have been artificially created, that doesn't have to be the end of your journey. There are ways around it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Never give up. Persevere. If I like to tell people that I'm nothing if not determined. And you could have all of the intelligence, all of the natural innate ability to do a lot of different things. But if you're not willing to persevere and be determined to achieve something, I think it's those people that will go farther in life than others. I have a question for you. Have you ever felt like or thought of yourself as having a disability because of your colorblindness?
No, not at all. It's unique.
But I hadn't either. But when I was in my last company in software, at some point we were filling out a survey, and I can't remember exactly what the survey was for or what, but one of the questions was, do you have a disability? And it listed all the different types of disabilities that could be considered a disability. And colorblindness was on the list. And I thought, oh my goodness, do I have a disability? It was just so weird.
You mean I could have been parking close to the grocery store this whole time?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was kind of an eye-opener.
I mean, I get it though. If you are in a profession where, I've always said, like, if I couldn't be a great fashion designer, probably, if I'm not really seeing the nuances of shades, maybe in the same with the visual arts world.
Sure.
But it's only a disability in certain areas, I suppose. But how many amputees do we have that are thriving in certain area, physical areas,
yes.
With their prosthesis? So is it technically a disability? Not really. They found a way of turning what was perceived as a weakness into a strength. So, and I think it really is kind of in the eye of the beholder a little bit.
Fully agree. Yeah, great point.
Circling around to a comment you made, and then we'll kind of walk through some of your deployments in the Legion. Saying that they were the militia that were hired by aristocracy, or that was kind of the model back in the day. It's funny how we've come full circle, because I've made this point recently with the way that we are now forced to choose from people who are candidates for the president of the United States, who have only succeeded because they A, are extremely wealthy, and B, have zero ethics. And I say that because to become the president, you have to take money from lobbyists of military, weapons making companies and pharmaceutical companies and tobacco companies and all these things. That's how you got there. So if you think about it, it's demostocracy. It's not democracy. It's aristocracy with the kind of facade of democracy. And we need to get back to democracy. Don't get me wrong. I think democracy is an incredible, political system, but we found ourselves straying. And just to illustrate the point, our, young children, men and women in the military in the States, have been sent to fight wars that we had no business fighting for. And there's a lot of people that come on this show that were sent because of, post 9/11 knee jerk, and rightly so in some areas, completely wrongly in other areas where it's a completely different country. So many of them are reflecting back now, knowing that they did good in those places where they went, at a micro level, but macro, they were like, what was this for? And I think that we found ourselves almost, full circle again, where a lot of our men and women that sign up for all the right reasons are being used for, as pawns for political and financial gain, not for doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's it's one of the reasons why I identify more now as a Canadian than as an American, and it's not because of Americans. It's because of the political situation in the U.S. Um, and I know that there are multiple reasons and scenarios why things are becoming and have become the way they are. One of them being, I think, that there isn't as much of a shared sense of what it is to be an American, because like I know if you look at the statistics of the number of people in government that have done service, military service, it is a fraction of what it used to be. And so you don't have that shared kind of innate trust of your fellow American. And I mean, the black and white of it is the red and blue of Republicans and Democrats. The separation that seems to keep on happening between the two major political parties, it's a lot of that seems to be because they simply don't understand each other. And when you don't understand each other, that's often what leads to not just understanding, but or misunderstanding, but distrust. And when you don't have an opportunity when you're younger to experience an environment where you have to trust the person next to you, I feel like that is at least a part of what leads to what we're seeing in the U.S. right now, and in other countries as well. And I think that happens in just about every country. I mean, countries, with the U.S. as an example, America started because it needed to get away from the governments of Europe that were run by the aristocracies, the privileged classes that were running those parts of the continent. And so the people that got out from under that yoke, they started a country with an idea that was an amazing idea, that the idea of democracy, that the government of the people can rule themselves and make just laws for themselves. And that has worked for hundreds of years. But human nature, I think, is such that individuals can't help in most cases but accumulate power and wealth because they want to feel secure. And what people's definition of security differs from person to person, and people's ability to create that sense of security, whether it's through money or power or whatever, is different as well. And so ultimately, I think what we're seeing now in the States is you're getting a class of people that are wanting to feel more and more secure. And by doing that, they're creating more and more of a divide politically and economically. So it just antagonizes the whole situation where things and people and ideas are becoming more and more polarized. At some point, things are going to break down in the US. I remember reading not long ago that the upward mobility capability in Europe is better now than in the US. 250 years ago, that was why the US was created, was because there was no upward mobility in Europe. The US was able to create that with a new government and a new democracy, but now it's flipped. I wish I could kind of go back in time and get a sense of what it was like either during the American Civil War or during the American Revolutionary War, to see if there's how much, if at all, similar our society today is in the US to what it was like in those periods, and those periods leading to an ultimate break with the status quo and something being renewed. I don't like to be a fear monger, but yeah, in some ways it feels like things are getting close to the breaking point in the US.
I'm an eternal yet angry optimist, I always say, because I truly believe in the good in people. And I hope that the cracks that are forming in this system because I mean, you can go back, let's say worst case 9 years to see the absolute crumbling of, I don't even want to use the word leadership, people that are put in DC. I mean, it's just been an absolute debacle, and there's been such a deliberate wedge driven through this country. And you can see, you can request the statistics on the few people that are making billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars while, addiction, school safety, obesity. I mean, all these things that no one can refute. The ill health of the American people gets worse and worse and worse. So I don't think, people worried about like a revolution, a war. And I don't think it needs to be that way. I think it just needs to be an awakening of, what America's supposed to be. And I had a guest on the other day. I think it was Johnny Miller was talking about this, I think. I forget who it was. Anyway, regardless. And they said that you've got civilians and you've got citizens. And he said a civilian is just someone who's in that country, and they get to reap the benefits of all things America in this case. And you've got a citizen who actually invests in that country. So the soldier, the firefighter, those kind of people, teachers would be great examples of that kind of person. And then, everyone else that just does good in their community, volunteers, whatever it is. And the problem is that we haven't had a citizen as a president for quite a while now. Therein lies the problem. It's just take. And the people that pay are the Americans. I'll give you a perfect example. I just had Rick Mountcastle on the show, who was the lawyer that got to at least bring to trial Purdue Pharma and, the predatory actions of OxyContin that caused the opioid crisis that we're suffering from even to this day. And you listen to the government corruption with that. You listen to the FDA approving that, and all the backroom deals that were going on there. He also talks about nursing homes. And again, same thing. I've had Doug Orchard talking about our pensions and how private equity firms have been allowed to just take from those government pensions, again, first responders and teachers and all these people. So it is the same exact thing. A few people are preying on the masses for, as you alluded to, greed and power. And it's going to take a national awakening, an international awakening for the people. No one person is any more important than another. I don't give a shit if you're the president or the queen or whoever. We were all born the same way, cried the same way as babies, and we have equal, opportunity to have a good life, the same as everyone else. But you get born into a system and you're told, oh, no, you're just a coal miner, whatever the thing is. No, you're here. Just go to work, make money, pay your taxes. And meanwhile, these organizations, are preying on, your health is being ruined, all these things. And they are the ones that are gaining. They don't go to war. They start wars, but they don't send their children to war. So I think that's how we have the great American Revolution of 2026. Is by people realizing that the enemy of this whole disease that's going on is coming together and being one people once again.
I'm very curious to see what happens in 2026 and 2028. A great awakening can take the form of many different things. I obviously hope that the one is a great awakening. And that two, that it is a peaceful great awakening. It'll be interesting. It's an interesting time to be alive and to see what's happening in the world.
I can't imagine being a World War II veteran, having given so much and seeing this, spoiled child mentality that is celebrated in 2025. And I think if we really want to truly pay homage to the men and women that paved the path for us to be where we are today, we have to turn this thing around. It's that simple. I
totally agree.
There's dudes everywhere with this "don't tread on me" snake flag. It's like, dude, you are being trodden on constantly. When are you going to step up? Not with with your gun, with your mind. When are you going to step up, realize this is a game, read a few George Orwell books, and then have this, coming together. As you talked about in the Legion, the tossed salad, which sends two images in my mind simultaneously. This is this melting pot of humans. And as I'm sure you were talking about, Ukrainians and Russians and, whoever the other people were. In their homeland, they were told they were enemies. In the Legion, they were men fighting side by side. And that is the
Yep.
point. We are human
Exactly.
first.
Yep. Fully agree.
All right. Well, good little rabbit hole to go down there. Let's get back on track now. So back to the Legion. Where was it that you first found yourself deployed once you kind of got this green light, you navigated your training with airborne? Where did you find yourself first?
Yeah, so I went to the Parachute Regiment, and that regiment is based in Calvi, Corsica, and it's there that we did our TAP, Troop Aeroporte, so basically airborne troop training, and I was assigned to the 4th Company, and that each of the 4 companies in the Parachute Regiment, they're kind of modeled after the SAS actually, where the 4th Company was focused on explosives and sniping. I'm not a great shot. I'm okay with a pistol, not with a rifle. So I didn't have my 20/20 eyesight, so I didn't do sniping. I invested my time in explosives. The 3rd Company was the amphibious company. 2nd Company was the mountain company, and the 1st Company was the urban combat specialization. So I was in the 4th Company, and that would have been April, May, June, July, summer of 93. And it was in the winter of 94 that I was first deployed to Chad, Northern Africa. So Northern and Central Africa at the time, and still for the most part today, is kind of like France's colonial backyard still. They're all obviously independent countries, but France has a lot of military, economic, and political investments in those areas, and so Chad is one of them. And so they have rotating regiments going into multiple countries, Chad being one. And so my company was assigned to go to Chad, and there are basically 2 places or head bases in Chad that France has bases in, and that is N'Djamena, which is the capital, and then Abaché, which is this, I guess technically it is a city, but it's, for the most part, I would say it's kind of like mud huts, houses. There is an airstrip at the French military outpost there, and I think that's the reason why it exists for the French, and for why a French company, or was it a platoon or a company that we'd always go out there as? I think it was just a platoon. So my platoon rotated out to Abaché, and it felt kind of like the quintessential Legion outpost that you might see a picture of a Legionnaire with a white kepi and a kind of long robe and a rifle standing in the middle of the desert. That was Abaché. And we were there in Abaché for a month, and we were always going on tours on kind of going out into the bush and doing patrols for days at a time in vehicles. I know at least once, if not more than a couple times, we actually crossed the border into Libya, just to kind of check out what was going on. And it was there that I dug my first hole as a Legionnaire, because I wasn't sleeping with my rifle in my sleeping bag. And so for punishment, from like 2 or 3 in the morning until daybreak, I had to dig a hole in the sand. Got a great photo of it. It ended up being like, I don't know, 7-8 feet deep. But it was a great experience just being there, doing that, having now colleagues from around the world, learning about different parts of the world and people and life that I never would have thought I would. And I was enjoying being young. Now I look back on it, I was having the time of my life, experiencing that. And so we were there for 4 months in Chad, rotated back to the capital of the country. But there was there are always kind of little things going on in North and Central Africa. Sometimes big things like Sudan right now. And Sudan at the time was calm. Sudan is immediately to the east of Chad, and Abaché is just a few hours drive from the border of Sudan, but there was nothing going on at the time. So it was fairly low key in Chad. Nothing big happening. So that tour ended. Went back. Then after that tour is when I got my first leave. So that would have been over a year since I had joined the Legion, and I got my first leave where it was the first time that I got to put on civilian clothing again, and that just putting on a pair of Levi's felt strange. I was starting to just a few weeks before leaving Africa and knowing that we were going to get leave, I started dreaming about McDonald's Big Macs and like the foods that I was going to eat and the things that I was going to do and just the clothes that I was going to wear. It all felt so foreign. And when I went on leave, I understood finally what, at least an inkling of what it might have been like for people that had been in Vietnam or different conflicts. And when they go on leave or they finish their service, and how life just doesn't feel the same, that it is different, or that people don't understand or whatever. I didn't have it nearly to that same degree because I didn't have the same anywhere near that same level of challenge, I guess, just being in Chad. But it was, I got an inkling of what the feeling was like. And my mother and sister actually came to France to spend time with me on my leave. So I didn't actually leave the country. I just stayed in France, and for a week we kind of roamed around the country. So that was fun. Then went back after leave, and that was when, so that would have been 94. That was when we went on our first commando training school in the Pyrenees. So there's a national commando training center in two locations in the Pyrenees. One is in Collioure, which is right on the coast of the Mediterranean. And then the Pyrenees start basically right up there, splitting Spain and France. And the other part of the training was in a fort area called Mont-Louis. There are a string of forts all along the Pyrenees that were developed in like the 15 or 1600s by a famous military architect called Vauban. He was like the most famous military architect of the time. And so one of these forts has been turned into a commando training center. And so did that for, I want to say 3 weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. That was great fun. That was, I mean, learned survival training and advanced hand-to-hand combat and foreign weapons instruction. Had like obstacle courses of all different types all over the place. And I loved it. It was being tested physically. And I did pretty well in that course as well, and doing like multiple night-long marches, like 75 kilometers in 3 nights, and being fed things that you wouldn't believe you could eat. It was, yeah, loved it the whole time. I mean, now that I think back on it, I'm like, wow, that was just so awesome. I love that. I'm sure, as the example, when in the middle of it, I was like, man, this really is hard. This sucks.
What was the worst thing you had to eat?
Live fish. So when we were in Collioure, which is on the coast, right at the base of the Pyrenees, we were given a bucket. I don't know if they were mackerel or I don't know what they were, but that was the meal for the day. Was a bucket of these, I don't know, like 6 or 8 inch long fish that were kind of flapping around. And for me, it wasn't that bad. It actually wasn't bad at all. One of the things that I did in the Legion was I didn't want people to be fully confident or secure on who I was. So one of the things that I did was I would eat random things that people be like, what are you doing? And that's like gross. And I ate lizards and frogs and worms that were, I mean, always live, but just to kind of keep people on their toes a little bit. But the flapping fish that were a pretty decent size that you couldn't just swallow whole, that took a little getting used to.
So what about Bosnia? How did you find yourself there, and what was your experience?
Bosnia was a mess. So when I finished my jump training in the rep and was assigned to the 4th Company, that company had just gotten back from Bosnia in 1993, and they were based primarily in Sarajevo, and it was when the Civil War was kind of at its height. And whether they were there as a part of the UN or not, I'm not sure, but it was apparently pretty darn hairy, and the Serbs and the Croats and the Bosnian Muslims and just the whole mix, they were all fighting each other, and you had the Legion trying to insert itself to keep them from killing each other, but instead oftentimes they just killed the Legionnaires that were there because they were in the way, basically. And so it was the first time I met some guys that had some physical scars from being there. I had learned that some of the guys did not come back from there. And that's when I really felt like, okay, I'm really a newbie here. I'm really just, I don't know anything. And so it was after my first tour to Africa that we went back to Bosnia in 96, I think, from November 95 to the spring of 96. So we were there. It was cold. Let me put it that way. I mean, the Winter Olympics were in Sarajevo for a reason, and that they get a fair amount of snow. And so while I can't say, because I wasn't there in 93, I don't think that things were as hot in 95, 96 as they were in 93. One, because there was more of a UN presence there by that time in 95, 96. And two, there was more, I think that there was more attention from the world on what was happening in Yugoslavia. So while the Croats and the Bosnians and the Bosnian Muslims and Serbs were still fighting each other, it wasn't as active. They still were, and there were still some kind of dicey situations, and I still sometimes felt like we were kind of in the middle of something that we shouldn't be there. But then you also had other influences that were starting to come in that Western countries were concerned about. So, for example, Iran was getting more involved in supporting Bosnian Muslims. I don't know how much or if Russia was supporting the Serbs or not. But the thing that I remember most about Bosnia was just the cold and sleeping, sometimes waking up under snow in a sleeping bag and just being freezing. And I don't do well with the cold. When I finished grad school, my only job criteria was that I had to live and work somewhere below the 35th parallel, which is like Florida, Southern California, Texas or something. But so here I was in Bosnia in the middle of winter without shelter. And so for me, that was more difficult. That was more tough than pretty much anything that I had experienced in the Legion.
I don't know if you saw, I'm pretty sure it was Sarajevo, almost certain it was that conflict, but a news story just broke that apparently there was almost like this human hunting thing that was going on where people from other countries were supposedly going to that war zone and being allowed to snipe. I forget which side it was now, but probably that kind of sniper alley type thing where,
Right.
literally like some of the Hollywood movies have portrayed in the past, where you were basically hunting humans.
Wow. I didn't know that. I can't say I personally experienced that there, but I wouldn't be surprised because they were all three sides. They were also determined. I remember on one of our patrols, we were on patrol specifically to find and destroy um, uh, sniper positions on the side of some hill somewhere, and I remember seeing how much time and effort and resources, and I can't remember who it was, whether it was the Serbs or the Croats or the Bosnian Muslims, had put into creating these different bivouacs and tunnels and barricaded places on the side of this mountain. But it was impressive, and the trenches that they had going between them, I couldn't believe that they had actually left these positions, because they seemed so well fortified. But it was great. I have to say it was fun kind of blowing them all up and eliminating them. But yeah, they were all three sides. They were pretty darn determined.
So, what made you finally decide to transition out of the Foreign Legion, and then which kind of career path did you take after that?
Yeah. I knew when I went to the Legion that it wasn't going to be a lifelong career. The I knew it had to be at least 5 years. 5 years is the minimum initial contract, and I was fairly confident that I would do that minimum 5 years and no more, and then go back to a normal career. What that career would be, I didn't know at the time, and but I do remember. So in my third tour, when I was in the Central African Republic, we actually did go on. So we went on tour, a second tour to Chad, and when we were on tour in Chad, that's when we were called up to go from Chad to the Central African Republic, because there was basically a coup d'état was in progress, and so we were sent. So this was in '97, and I remember I had started to think about, okay, I've got a year and something left before I'm done with my 5 years. What do I want to do next? And I decided I wanted to go to graduate school. So I wanted to get a joint degree. I wanted to get an MBA and a Juris Doctorate, so a law degree. So I started to study for the entrance examinations for both of those. So there's something called the GMAT, which is what you take to get into graduate school for a master's or an MBA, and then there's the LSAT, which is the entrance exam you take to get into law school. So I had like books that I had brought with me to Chad, and that then came with me to Central African Republic, even though it was kind of a hot zone at that point. And I remember, so we would set up bivouacs or just sites for my squad and then our platoon in random places throughout the city, whether that was a totally rundown building that had been bombed for whatever reason, or a half-built building, or in one case we had taken over part of a Catholic convent. And I still remember we were in a room and I had my cot set up with mosquito netting and a flashlight, and I was studying for the GMAT. Well, and I was thinking, I bet there aren't many people that have studied for their entrance examination in a place like this. But again, because I was getting close to the end of my career with the Legion, I knew I wanted to go back to school. And I was again thinking maybe finance, even though I wasn't, again, that great with numbers. And so when I did finish the Legion and got accepted to the George Washington University, which is in Washington, D.C., I was not accepted into their law school, but I was accepted into their international affairs program. So I was able to pursue an MBA in international business, and then a master's in international affairs. And what allowed me to do the international affairs was now being able to speak French because of having been in the Legion. What I really wanted to do with either of those two degrees, I didn't even know then. What I realized, though, was that I was really going back to school to network, to find out about what there was in the world that I could do as a more traditional career. And it was where I actually realized again, I knew this in undergrad, that I really like technology. I love computers, love software. I'm good at it. And so even though I got degrees in areas that are not specific to technology, I figured that I like technology so much I can learn it on my own. And that's essentially what I did. So this was the .com era, so the 2000s. And after graduate school, I got a job with a technology company called MicroStrategy, and they did analytics. So basically, data mining, the precursor of data cleansing and data quality and data analytics, like algorithms and statistics and machine learning, and now called artificial intelligence that you have today. But it was in that area. And so I was hired by this company called MicroStrategy, and they were the high flyers at the time for this area of software. Their stock had skyrocketed to $300 a share, and they were hiring as fast as they could. And so because I had my primary job criteria was that I live and work somewhere below the 35th parallel, they hired me to work out of their Southern California office. So I was finishing my 2 degrees. I was driving from Washington, D.C. to basically El Segundo, California, which is just south of Los Angeles, and stopping to see my parents in Colorado and Arizona on the way. And it was when I was in Colorado that I saw on the news that this company that I had just been hired by, their stock price had fallen from 300 to 30. I can't remember why it happened, something drastic, I don't know. But I basically learned through the news that they were letting go of a boatload of people. And I thought, I wonder if I'm one of those people. So I basically contacted my company, and they said, oh yeah, you no longer have a job waiting for you in California. I was like, oh, okay. But you get to keep your signing bonus, your moving bonus, and you get severance. And this is for a company that I had not worked a minute for. I had not even started my job. But they also gave me a spreadsheet with 100, 200 contacts of companies and recruiters around the U.S., even their competitors, that I could start contacting to find another job.
They handled that pretty well compared to what you hear of a lot of companies.
I was really impressed, and have been impressed to this day by that company for having done that. They obviously didn't have to do that, but they did. And so I was, I was impressed. And not only that, but it was 2 years later, after I had been working for this other company, that I received a letter from this original company, MicroStrategy, and it was an additional check because they said they had taken too much taxes out of the severance that they had given me. So it was. I was like, all right, I wish I could find more jobs like this. Mm-hmm. But the company that I ultimately then worked for, Crystal Decisions, was headquartered in Vancouver, Canada.
Is that below that latitude line you're talking about?
Oh, it's way above it. It's Canada US parallel is 49th parallel. So yeah, I definitely did not meet my primary job criteria. So I started working for them out of Colorado, because that happened to be where my mother was living and where I grew up. And so I worked out of Colorado for a year. But all of their new hires came to Vancouver for the initial company training. So there was a week of company training, and then if you were in a technical software role, which is what I was in, you would take technical training as well. And it's just so happened that my future wife was the technical trainer. So she, either I was a good student or I needed remedial training, one of the two, but we hit it off. And coming this March, we will have been together for 25 years. And so that's how I ended up in Vancouver.
Amazing. So you're in this kind of corporate space for a long, long time. Where does the itch to get into aviation come from? And let's kind of walk through that journey.
Yeah. So I had this company that I started with, Crystal Decisions. It was acquired twice, and ultimately became what is today SAP, which is a multinational software company, headquarters in Germany. It's kind of Germany's Microsoft. Like 70% of the world's commerce goes through an SAP system at some point or another. And I had a really great career with SAP, 19 years. Started off as a kind of a junior technical consultant and finished as a vice president of our analytics organization. I was starting to get burnt out with the industry, not just the industry, but white collar work. But there was an opportunity to join a smaller startup / growth company that had actually been started by executives from SAP. So I gave that a go it was almost 4 years. And in February of 2023, the company had a reduction in force. So they let some people go. And for the first time in my life, I was someone that was let go from a job. And at first I was like, my self-confidence was like down the tubes. I thought, wow, I'm being let go. I guess I'm not needed or not wanted or something. But it was literally just a few minutes after I was having the conversation with both HR and my boss, who I'm still really good friends with, that I realized this is actually great, because I had been feeling since before coming to that company that I was kind of stuck. I wasn't challenged. I was more going through the motions of this job. And so it was a blessing in disguise that I was let go, again, with severance. So, and I had invested as well. So I've always been interested in the stock market. Like when I was in the Legion, when most of my comrades, they were spending their money on wine, women, and booze, as a famous Tom T. Hall song goes. I was actually sending international money orders back to the U.S. with Fidelity Investments and investing in the stock market. And so that investing has really served me well. And so that's what allowed me in February 2023 to decide, I could either just retire at 53 years old, or I could do something totally different. And so I was told it was still COVID time in the winter of 2023, February 2023. But people were just starting to go back to the office that wanted to. And I was one that I functioned better in the office than at home to do work. And so I was there in the office. It was like 8:30 in the morning. No one else was there. But I see my boss and the head of HR coming down the hallway, and they're coming toward my desk, and there's no one else around on the whole floor. And I'm thinking, I wonder if they're just coming to chat. And they get to my desk, and I'm sitting there looking up at them, and they say, can we have a conversation? I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So we went into this little conference room and started letting me know that I was being let go. And so after that, it was mid-morning, and I'm walking home, and I get home, and it's like 10 in the morning, walk through the door. My wife's working from home, and she looks at me, and she's on a conference call, and she's like, got a puzzled look. And so she hangs up, and she's like, have you been let go from work? She could feel it. She knew. And I was like, yep. And I was like, and I feel great. Because the walk home from the office, it was like a 40-minute walk. It was becoming more and more evident to me that I was like, I was being let go. I was being let go, and that I was being set free. Because I had these kind of golden handcuffs of the security of the salary I was making, the bonuses that I would get, and all that stuff. But it's not what I needed in life. I needed to be challenged again. And so I went back out from home and decided there's a famous walk in Vancouver called the Seawall. And it's basically Vancouver's on a peninsula, and you can walk around the seawall. And it was kind of like today. It was a gray, chilly, wet morning, and I'm walking around the seawall, and I hear a helicopter flying overhead. And I look up, and it was this sleek blue and white helicopter. Now I know it's a Sikorsky S-76, but it looks like an executive helicopter. That they don't have the skids, the wheels retract up into the body, and it was just cruising along overhead, going over Stanley Park. And I was like, that's pretty cool. Maybe I should look again into becoming a helicopter pilot or a pilot of some sort. And so a few days later, I'm researching all this, and the first thing I was worried about was my eyesight, my color blindness. And that's when I started reading about how you can be color deficient or have some levels of color blindness, but you can still fly. I didn't know still what exactly type of color blindness I had or how bad it was, if it was too bad to fly. But I went and got a aviation medical exam, and was fine for everything except for the colored dot book test. And the physician, he was an airplane pilot, and he was asking me why I wanted to become a helicopter pilot. One, at my age, 53, and two, why helicopters? Aren't they more dangerous? What happens if you lose an engine in a helicopter? Because now I know differently, but he thought if a helicopter loses an engine, it just kind of falls to the ground like a rock, unlike a plane that can glide. And I thought, well, that's part of why I want to do this. It's more dangerous. I want the challenge. Now I learned that if a helicopter loses an engine, it can glide to the ground just as well, actually better than an airplane. But anyway, so I failed the color test, and I said, I understand that there's an additional color test that I can take called the Farnsworth test. And so they booked me for an appointment with an optometrist or ophthalmologist specialist to be able to take this test. And that's what I did then. And at the same time, I was then researching aviation schools in the area, so helicopter schools. And that's when I ultimately landed on the school that I got my license from, called Chinook Helicopters. They were able to take me in like a month and a half after I inquired and got my initial flight in a helicopter. They give you a first flight just to see if you would like to do something like that. And I loved it. And when you do that first flight, they give you the controls as much as they can or that you can handle. And I learned pretty quickly that it was going to take me a while to learn the cyclic and the collective and the pedals and just be able to hover. Hover is actually quite hard in a helicopter already. But when you're 53 years old and your brain doesn't make these new connections as quickly as it did when you were 23 years old, things take longer. So I learned pretty quickly that while you can teach an old dog new tricks, it just takes longer. And so it took me about twice as long as the people that were half my age to get through the school. So from May 23 to December 23, I was full-time learning how to fly helicopters and learning all of the ground school portion, the theoretical part, from aerodynamics to weather to there's lots of legal parameters that you have to learn about flying anywhere in the world. It's basically like going to university again. It's like getting a university degree, but for flying. But I was loving every minute of it. It was, well, no, I shouldn't say that. It's recent enough memory so that I know I wasn't loving every minute of it. There were many days where I was so frustrated with myself because it was taking me so long to learn some of these things, and not to learn the theoretical pieces, but to get my brain and my body to work together, to learn just the art and the science of flying, to get my hands and my feet and my brain, to get those new pathways in my brain to be created, to learn this stuff. And it was so frustrating so many times. And there were several times where I thought, man, am I going to be able to get this, or am I just throwing money down the drain? And I asked multiple times my instructor and other instructors at the school, like, is there a point where you know that you just can't be a pilot? And for the most part, they were like, yeah, you haven't gotten there yet. Keep pushing for it. And at one point I was even, are they just saying this because I'm giving them, I'm fairly well off, I can just keep on paying them to try to teach me how to fly a helicopter? But ultimately, I got it, and I passed my flight test with great. It was like flying colors, pun intended. And since then, I've gotten endorsements on multiple types of helicopters. I've gotten my night rating. I just finished my instrument flight rules rating, which is what will allow me to fly for the company I work for now, Helijet, which is the first helicopter that I saw flying overhead 2 years ago, and flying to the helicopter pad in the middle of the city where I now work doing groundwork for this company, Helijet. And it gave me a new lease on life. I feel 20 years younger. I'm challenged again. I'm excited to go to work in the morning. If someone would have told me a few years ago that when you're 55 years old, you'll be working outside in the rain, making less than a living wage, I would have thought, what, are you crazy? But I love going to work. I love working with people that are half my age. I like the fact that I've learned a new skill, and that soon I will be flying and being paid to fly rather than paying to fly.
Just to underline that point, at the moment, you're providing the ground services for the pilots. Is that right? So that just to kind of show the determination in getting to this point, you have the humility to do the jobs that are supporting the pilot.
That's absolutely right. And not only that, like, I vacuum the floors, I clean the bathrooms, I get things, I load people's suitcases, I clean the helicopters, I refuel the helicopters. I'm not even being paid to fly yet. I have gotten to the point where I can fly without having to pay to fly. So Helijet will let me fly their helicopters if there are no passengers on it. I'll either be flying for Helijet sometime soon, or I'm looking at another company as well, where it's actually another potential chapter on my adventure. I might be flying for a company called Custom Helicopters in Manitoba, flying near the Arctic Circle, either flying emergency medical helicopters or flying another type of helicopter to provide supplies and ferrying people and medical equipment for indigenous populations that you can't get to easily. So there are lots of opportunities I'm looking at now for this, but I like to say the world's my oyster, and this is what I've chosen to do in it now.
That sounds amazing, especially the second one. Really does. How did you and Dave cross paths then? Was it in the sim?
No, not necessarily. So he's doing the sim work now. Our paths crossed so Helijet does recurring ground school training for all of its pilots. And so the chief pilot at Helijet, his name's Mike Garland. He was also a pilot in the British military. Just a great guy. And his mantra is that anyone that is a pilot at Helijet, regardless of the work they're doing at Helijet, they are pilots in his eyes. So even those of us that are pilots but that are still doing groundwork, he lets us participate in the ground school recurrent training with the Helijet pilots. And that's where I met Dave Becerra Best first. He was an instructor in the ground school. And and he had heard about me through Mike Garland, and so we'd had a few conversations back and forth about our experiences in the military, and I got to fly with Dave. There was a point in time where there were no passengers on his flight, so he let me fly the helicopter from Vancouver to Vancouver to downtown to the international airport, which is where Helijet bases most of its helicopters at night. And then we hit it off from there. And so in the last couple weeks before he was leaving Helijet to go do his new simulator career, we were just chatting more and more about different things. And that's when I learned that he was colorblind. And that's where he learned that I was colorblind and some of the challenges that I had gone through to actually serve in the military. And that's when he said, you really should talk to James. And I was like, I'm not that, I don't have that colorful of a history like yours. And I listened to the podcast that you two did, and I thought, wow, that was really cool. And he'd also had a British documentary series on first responders stuff, but in particular, not the Coast Guard, but I can't remember what it used to be called in the British military. It used to be the British military that provided first responder services, and now I think it's a private organization. But he flew Pumas for a regiment, multiple regiments in the RAF for first responders, and I know he flew with Prince William, and so watching those episodes was really cool. And so that's how I got to know Dave.
Fantastic. Well, I want to be mindful of your time, so I'm going to throw some quick closing questions at you, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
First one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
That is a good question. Well, right now I'm reading Cosmos by Carl Sagan. And I have a very eclectic taste in books and music. So I'm reading Cosmos now. I just finished The Underground Railroad by author's name escapes me. The biographies of George Washington and Franklin. I like science fiction. I like fantasy. But if there's any one particular book that sticks with me more than any other, you might laugh at this, but it is probably Gone with the Wind, which is about the U.S. It's a historical fiction, U.S. Civil War, and I'm fascinated by the American Civil War for reasons I can't explain, and I have a romantic nostalgia for the South, even though I didn't believe in pretty much any of the reasons why they were fighting. But when I was reading Gone with the Wind, it was just before I decided to leave for the Legion, and I was doing different things just to kind of explore the world or test myself. And so I was fasting for 3 days, and on the second day of my fasting is when I started reading this book, Gone with the Wind. And the first couple chapters of this book are the author describing these amazing feasts of Southern food being cooked and eaten. And I'm on my second day of fasting, and I'm thinking, oh my, how is this happening? How is this? But the book itself is a fantastic story. So I would probably go to the book Gone with the Wind.
Ken Burns just released a documentary on the American Revolution. I think it just came out on PBS. Oh, you are? Yeah, I haven't hit play yet, but I'm looking forward to finding some time for that.
Yeah, it's really good.
All right. Well, speaking of that then, what about television, film, documentaries that you love?
I would say if I had to choose only one film that I could have experienced or that I could recommend to someone, well, there are two, but the one that I think is probably more important is The Mission, with the music by Ennio Morricone and directed by, I can't remember the director. He's a British director, but it's about 16th century South America, and the Spanish and the Portuguese, they're fighting over territory, and how they basically completely mistreat and subjugate the indigenous peoples there, and where the Catholic religion has the opportunity to, what's the word I want? They're trying to do good things, but they're caught between the nobilities of Spain and Portugal, and essentially in order to keep the peace in Europe, the Catholic Church decides that the Portuguese win this argument, which means that the indigenous peoples are further subjugated and enslaved. And it's a heartbreaking story, but it's also a beautiful story because Robert De Niro is in it, and he starts off as a slave runner, but basically kills his brother for various reasons, becomes a Jesuit priest, trying to be a better person, but ultimately ends up becoming a fighter again to fight off the Portuguese. But because he's doing that, he's excommunicated from the Jesuit order. And it's not a happy ending in this movie, but it's just beautifully written and acted, and the music is beautiful as well. So The Mission. The second movie, Star Wars. Yeah, I was 7 years old when Star Wars came out, and I still remember my grandfather taking me to Star Wars. I've always been a Star Wars fan.
It's interesting what you're saying about The Mission. My mom and my brother moved to Portugal, so I've got to really kind of experience it, not only visiting, but also from them living there now. And they now, in modern society, are a very, very well-connected, communal, kind society, where a lot of the things that the Portuguese leaders do are for the betterment of the Portuguese people. So they're kind of looked down on by a lot of European nations, I think, because they're not as developed, however you want to call it, but they do a lot of things so well. And then even with the Catholic Church, of course, there are some very dark chapters of that specific part of the religion too in the history. But the Catholic Church is being the loudest voice when it comes to some of the atrocities that are happening around the world, and them opposing it. So it just goes to show you can have a bad past like the British and, hopefully do better things.
Yep.
Or you can not stand up against the tyranny in your own country and watch your country start to spiral towards those atrocities. So cautionary tale.
Yeah, that is a great point. And it's also, it shows as well that we are all human. No one's perfect. There's always a chance for redemption, whether you're an individual or an entire country. And so I'm an optimist by nature as well. I like to say that optimism is a free resource. So I'm optimistic that we, as a human species, we will still find our way and ultimately be better in the future than we have been in the past.
I agree, because I think if you look at a lot of the ancient wisdom, if you look at the core of a lot of the religious texts, they are about kindness, compassion, empathy, service. And the reason why those have lasted for so long is because our ancestors are telling us, look, don't do the war thing, don't do the torture and enslavement thing, do the kindness, compassion, love thing. So it wouldn't have stood the test of time if the future of humanity was just for us to kill each other. It makes no sense. So we can turn our heads away from history, or we can lean into it and say, all right, it's time for us to start learning now.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, I'm a believer that there is extraterrestrial life. And I'm a believer that when we find extraterrestrial life, that hopefully it will not be too late. I don't think it will be. That will be one of the major things that make us realize that we're all in this together, and that we will realize that we need to help each other, and that we do understand each other, and that we have a core set of beliefs that we all can operate by, and that are centered around all those words that you just used.
If they come bearing anal probes, I've got a list of who they should hit first.
Yeah. Nice.
All right. Well, the next question, is there a person that you recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
There would be. So a fellow Legionnaire and Canadian, whose name is Joel Struthers. He is also a helicopter pilot. He became a helicopter pilot pretty much right after he left the Legion. So he's been a helicopter pilot for a long time. And he had a very colorful career in the Legion. And he actually wrote several books, in one book specifically about his time in the Legion. And I will text that to you. But I think he would be an excellent person for you to have on your show.
Beautiful. He sounds amazing. So thank you. All right. Well, the very last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you. What do you do to decompress?
So I do woodworking for a hobby. I've made all of the wood furniture in my home, and I have a wood shop. So this hobby started like 12, 13 years ago, and just going to a local community center, learning how to do some woodworking, and that evolved into me purchasing a commercial property where I have my wood shop, and I lease the upper floor to an architect. And at the time, my wife said, "Your hobby's getting expensive," but it has been a very good purchase. And since then, both financially and mentally, because that is where I go to decompress. I go to my workshop, and there's no one else there. There's just my tools and machines, and some of the tools come from my wife's great grandfather who built houses in Vancouver, and I use them, and I almost kind of feel his presence when I'm using his chisels and hand planes, and but that's where I go to get away from everyone and everything and decompress.
Beautiful. For people listening then, if they want to reach out to you, learn more about you, where are the best places online to do that?
I'm not very good at social media and social sites, but LinkedIn is the place where I have anything that is about me or that I kind of pay attention to some degree would be on LinkedIn.
I'm clearly not very good at social media either, because Instagram shut my page down for the second time. So it doesn't seem to like kindness, compassion, unity, that kind of thing. But if I was divisive, I'm sure I'd probably have 1 million followers. So
right.
All right. Well, Ty, I want to thank you so much. Thank you to Dave again for connecting us. But thank you. It's been such an interesting conversation, so different than so many on here. And for the first time on this show, at least, an insight into this incredibly kind of mystical unit known as the Foreign Legion. And then, your journey in, and then again, the humility to, at 53 years old, say, I'm going to do something else. So I want to thank you so, so much for being so generous with your time today and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast.
Well, James, thank you very much for having me on. I am very thankful and honored to be on it. So appreciate it.